Hello and welcome, dear friends. Thank you for joining me for tonight's bedtime story, a gentle journey into forgotten gardens and quiet moments of the heart. If you enjoy this peaceful escape, please take a moment to like the video and share your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to know which part moves you or what memories it brings. Now, get comfortable, breathe deeply, and let's begin. Chapter 1: The Road into Silence. The train glided calmly along the steel rails through the mountainous terrain of Yamagata Prefecture. Outside the window, pines flashed by more and more frequently, mossy rocks, and wooden houses clinging to the hillsides. From time to time, a blue river flickered past, winding like memories that won't let you rest. I had been traveling for nearly 5 hours from Tokyo. From the steel and glass of the city, I had come to these rugged mountains, where even silence seems to breathe more deeply. The conductor bowed quietly as he checked tickets, then disappeared into the next car. Only 3 passengers sat in the cabin: an old man with a vintage camera, an elderly couple in matching plum-colored jackets, and me, a city man with overtired eyes. In my backpack, nothing unnecessary: one notebook, a folder with a few letters, an old book that still faintly smelled of lavender, and a bundle of black tea. I had no clear goal, just the urge to escape. Lately, when I woke up to the city's noise, even my morning coffee felt loud. No thought or sound could be held on to. Everything slipped through my fingers. 20 minutes before arriving at Yamashiro-an station, I opened the window. The air here was different, damp, cool, but alive. It smelled of pine bark, mist, and fresh rain. Deep inside, I felt something slow down. My body was still in motion, but my thoughts were already sitting beneath a cedar on a hillside, listening to the wind. When the train slowly came to a stop, I stepped out onto a small platform with no announcements, no crowds. Yamashiro-an station looked more like an old wooden pavilion with a black roof and a faded wooden sign than part of any modern infrastructure. A narrow platform, a few benches, a vending machine for hot drinks, and a few crows perched on the wires. My backpack felt light on my shoulders, but something in my chest felt heavy. Maybe it was exhaustion. Maybe it was the expectation of silence. I walked slowly past the station building. On the wall hung a clock, its hands barely moved, ticking with a kind of human hesitation. At the bus stop, there was an old ochre-colored taxi. The driver was asleep, his forehead resting against the wheel. I didn't wake him. The road led downward, across a river, over a wooden bridge, along a narrow path that vanished into the fog. Stones crunched softly underfoot. Light raindrops fell on my shoulders, cold, but not biting, as if reminding me that I still had a body. The landscape around me was self-contained. Everything bore the face of age: the trees that had seen hundreds of rains, the bridge that creaked as if recalling other footsteps, other eras. I walked, slowly unwinding a thread that led me from my noisy past into a quiet unknown. After 40 minutes of unhurried walking, I saw the gate. It was made of dark wood, visibly smooth, with carvings along the sides, waves, leaves, a crane. Above the arch, a modest wooden plaque with calligraphy, Yamashiro-an. I stopped. It was my first true breath of silence. The ryokan stood behind the gate, partially hidden by trees and morning mist. A tall Iramoya-style roof, a wooden terrace, and a bamboo window shutter hanging gently from it. Nothing loud. Everything a natural extension of the land. As if it had always been there. I touched the gate. It didn't creak. It simply accepted. I stepped across the threshold. The soft crunch of gravel underfoot was the first sound to greet me after the silence of the gate. The courtyard was arranged with an impeccable modesty, a small pond with 2 koi fish, a moss-covered stone by a bamboo fence, a thin stream crossing the garden on a diagonal. The wind stirred the tiles on the roof, and they gently chimed, not like metal, but as if resonating with ceramic memory. Someone was already waiting by the entrance. A middle-aged woman in a light kimono patterned with soft gray clouds and plum branches stood with a gentle bow of the head. Her posture held no blind submission, no exaggerated courtesy, only quiet dignity. Her face was calm, and her hands were folded palm to palm. "Irashimasu," she said softly. "Welcome to Yamashiro-an." I bowed, awkwardly, as best I could. She smiled, barely, only with her eyes. Then she stepped aside and gestured to a small wooden stand for shoes. I removed my sneakers. Stepped onto the wooden floor. The dark wood felt warm to the touch. The outside sounds vanished, as if the house had swallowed the noise and replaced it with its own, the soft ticking of rain in the gutter, the faint rustle of fusuma, the sliding screens. "My name is Kyoko. I am the okami of this ryokan," the hostess said. "Nice to meet you," I replied. My voice sounded strange, too loud for this place. She nodded and motioned me to follow her. We moved down a wooden hallway. On the walls, old calligraphy scrolls. One caught my eye, a few simple black characters, and a small red seal below. The art of the pause. A stillness within motion. "That's a haiku by Matsuo Basho," Kyoko noted, seeing my gaze. The silence of an old pond, a frog jumps in, the splash of water. And then, again, silence, I whispered. "Exactly," she said, smiling. We stopped before a room. She opened the fusuma, not like opening a door, but more like unlocking a memory. Inside, traditional tatami room. Spacious. Light-filled. Nothing excessive, a low wooden table, the matte glow of a paper lamp, a tokonoma alcove with a branch of maple, and one scroll bearing a character I couldn't read. This one means sun, providence. But also, trace. Water that passes leaves a thin trace on stone, Kyoko explained. I nodded silently. "Please, rest. Tea will be brought in half an hour." "Thank you." "And, what is this room called?" "Hibiku," she replied. "It means, to echo. Because peace here leaves an echo." She bowed and left me. I remained alone. The rain whispered beyond the window. The air smelled of wood, rice paper, and something else, old, calm, warm. I sat on the floor. Just like that. No thoughts. Only listening. When I looked again at the paper lantern trembling in the breeze, I realized, it hadn't been just 30 minutes. It had been much longer. Time here didn't flow. It settled, like mist on stone. Then, suddenly, but not sharply, I heard a sound, the soft rustle of kimono on tatami. It came like the scent of a flower, unexpected, but natural. The fusuma slid aside. A young woman entered. Quiet, with dark hair tied into a small knot. Her kimono was the color of autumn leaves, tied with a plain white sash. In her hands, a round tray with a teapot and 2 bowls. "Good afternoon," she said gently. Her voice had a strange quality. It didn't break the silence. It joined it. "Good afternoon," I replied, rising to my knees. She sat across from me, smoothly, like a drop sliding down a lotus leaf. She placed the tray between us, then moved without a word. The teapot. The ceramic bowls. The bamboo whisk. The water, not boiling, but just the right temperature, as tea demands. She didn't rush. Every movement had intention. Every touch, respect. I had never attended a tea ceremony before. But I didn't feel the need to ask. I simply watched. Breathed in the steam rising from the bowl. It didn't smell only of tea. It held the forest, bamboo, stone, moss. "My name is Aki," she said, handing me the bowl with both hands. "And I am." I hesitated, unsure if I should give my name. I spoke softly, as if relearning how to be present. "You don't have to give your name, unless you want to," she said, smiling gently. "Sometimes it's better just to be." I nodded. She refilled her bowl. We drank in silence. But the silence wasn't awkward. On the contrary, it was fuller than many conversations. "You're from the city?" she asked after a long pause. "Yes. Tokyo." "So am I," she replied, eyes lowering slightly. "Once. And now you live here? In the ryokan?" She nodded slowly. "Yes. Almost 2 years now. This place, it's different. The days, the people, everything moves differently. And most importantly, no one here needs to prove anything. You can just be quiet." "Why did you leave the city?" Aki was silent for a while. Then spoke carefully, as if selecting stones in a garden. "Tokyo was loud. Loud even when everyone was silent." I understood her. "You must be running too," she added. I smiled. Didn't deny it. "Something like that." "Maybe not running away," she said. "Maybe just looking for a place to leave behind what's too much." I looked at her hands. They were slender, but bore light traces of work. Hands not playing a role, just doing what needed to be done. And doing it honestly. The tea was warm. Its taste lingered on my tongue even after the last sip. But longer still, it lingered within me. When she stood, she said, "Dinner is at 6. But you don't have to come right on time. No one's chasing anyone here." And again, the fusuma slid closed, leaving behind only the faint scent of green tea. I stayed seated. The air in the room felt denser. As if presence had taken root in it. After the tea ceremony, I took a few slow steps down the hallway leading to the onsen. The light of the lamps was dim, soft, like the evening sun barely brushing against silk. The narrow corridor smelled of cypress and fresh water. Near the entrance stood wooden buckets and light towels, neatly stacked in piles. Sounds from outside faded again, leaving only the gentle murmur of water trickling between stones. I left my clothes on a hanger and walked barefoot across the warm wooden floor. My body, still tense from the road and the rush, began to slowly release its fears. Entering the room with the pools, I felt a wave of moist heat hit my skin. The water was hot, but not scalding, more like a gentle embrace. Another person entered behind me, a middle-aged man with deep eyes, also seeking silence, just like I was. He didn't speak. Just nodded in greeting. I immersed myself completely. My body instantly relaxed, and the thoughts that had been scurrying through my mind seemed to dissolve in the steam above the water. The spring water was rich with minerals, and it felt as though it was washing away not just fatigue and worry, but even memories I no longer wanted to carry. Sitting in silence, I watched the mist dance above the water's surface. In that moment, I realized I was truly free, not from others, but from myself. Returning from the onsen, I stepped once again onto the tatami floor of my room, Hibiku. The air seemed even clearer here, the light softer, like fireflies slowly waking in the darkness. I sat by the low table, opened my notebook, and began writing down my impressions, slowly, unhurriedly. Each word was like a new breath, deep and intentional. Here, in this little ryokan among the mountains, the city's noise felt like a distant fairy tale. Even my thoughts had grown simpler, more lucid. Time moved differently here, not in a straight line, but in a circle, gently closing around me, allowing me to see myself anew. Dinner was simple, yet refined. Rice seasoned with delicate miso sauce, fresh vegetables prepared with reverence for nature, and a few slices of tender fish. Kyoko brought the dishes, moving lightly, like a breeze that touches nothing, but subtly changes everything. We exchanged only a few words, not too many. This was a night of silence and taste, a night when every gesture and every breath mattered. I thought about how little I had known of true peace. And how much more lay ahead. Chapter 2, The First Dawn. Waking early in the morning, I felt that the world had changed. The silence had grown thicker, as if it had absorbed all the dreams of the night. Paper screens gently swayed from a breeze drifting through the open windows. I slowly rose and breathed in the scent of freshness, damp moss, wooden floors, and faint notes of green tea lingering from the evening's ceremony. Outside, the sun was just beginning to break over the mountain peaks, casting a soft golden light on the landscape. The air was cool, filled with the anticipation of a new day. I put on the kimono, neatly folded on the chair, and stepped into the garden. The leaves were still wet with morning dew, and tiny drops sparkled on the stones like little diamonds. Kyoko was already preparing breakfast in the ryokan kitchen, and Aki was quietly gathering the tea utensils for the morning ceremony. We exchanged a glance. No words were needed. That was enough to understand that today would be another day of peace and awareness. Morning light gradually filled the room, diffused through the paper windows. Aki carefully arranged the tea utensils, her movements light, like air gently touching flowers. Kyoko sat nearby, her eyes focused on the thin stream of steam rising from the kettle. She spoke softly. Life here is different from the city. Here, you learn to treasure each moment. Every sip of tea is a small journey. I listened closely, trying to absorb each word. In the city, everything moves so fast, she continued. People often forget about peace because they're always chasing the future. But here, at Yamashiro-an, we live in harmony with nature and time. Her voice sounded like music, quiet, yet deeply resonant. And how did you come here yourself? I asked. Kyoko smiled, gazing into the distance through the window. It was a long path. I once lived in a big city too. I felt I had lost myself. Here, I found meaning in simplicity, in reverence for life. In this rhythm. We drank tea, and with each sip, I felt part of myself calm down and release tension. Maybe you're searching for that peace too? Kyoko asked gently. I said nothing. The answer was clear. After the tea ceremony, I stepped into the garden. Dew still sparkled on the moss and stones, and the air was filled with the scent of pine needles and freshness. The garden was small but carefully arranged. Every branch, every stone seemed to have its place and its meaning. The silence was broken only now and then by birdsong, gentle, melodic, unobtrusive. I walked slowly, trying not only to listen to the world around me, but to my own thoughts as well. What am I looking for? I quietly asked myself. City life had felt like an endless race, deadlines, meetings, a constant flood of news. But here, in this garden, for the first time in a long while, I felt I could stop. That I didn't have to be anyone else but myself. I remembered Kyoko's words about simplicity and respect for life. It struck me that this was exactly what I had been missing, simplicity that doesn't mean poverty, but rather a richness of awareness. A realization flickered in my mind: true peace isn't an escape from life, it's an acceptance of it. A discovery of a rhythm in which even the city's noise can become part of the harmony. I sat down on a stone, feeling the coolness of lingering moisture. I looked at the quiet flow of water cascading over rocks and understood, this simple moment was my small victory. Late in the evening, as the lantern lights melted again into the soft darkness, I found Aki in the rest room. She was sitting by the window, gazing at the starry sky. Her eyes reflected the light of distant stars, quiet, yet alive. You think a lot? She asked softly, without looking away from the night. Yes, I replied. Everything here feels different, and yet strangely familiar. She smiled, a smile that was both calm and somehow sad. There was a time I thought I'd find answers in the city, she said slowly. But the city is a maze, easy to get lost in. I was afraid to be alone with myself. Afraid I'd find emptiness. And what did you find? I asked. At first, silence. Then, myself. And in that silence, I learned to hear not just the world around me, but my own heart. We sat quietly, like two travelers sharing a calm after a long journey. And you? She asked. What are you searching for here? I thought for a moment. How could I explain it? Maybe I was looking for simplicity. For peace. A chance to stop running. To just be human, not part of the crowd. She nodded gently, as if she understood without words. That's the beginning, she said. Sometimes, simply being, is the hardest part. Chapter 4, Meeting Yuto. The next day, as the sun rose higher, I left the ryokan to follow the narrow paths leading to the village. Amid the trees and stones, I came across a man in his 30s, working on a wooden bridge. He looked up and smiled when he noticed me. "You must be new around here," he said with an easy smile. "Yes, I just arrived," I replied. "I'm Yuto," he said, offering a hand. "I live nearby. Let me know if you need anything." I liked his honesty and simplicity. "Why are you here?" I asked, glancing at his calloused hands. Yuto sighed. "I used to live in the city too," he began. "But eventually, I felt like I was losing myself in all the noise and rush. So I came back here, to be closer to nature, and to meaning." His story felt familiar, yet each of us walks our own path. Yuto finished fixing the bridge and looked at me, a little tired, but with peace in his eyes. "After a few years in Tokyo, where every day felt like a marathon, I realized that life wasn't for me," he said. "I lost my sense of purpose chasing careers and material goals. I felt like I was dissolving into the crowd, like a drop in the ocean." He ran his hand along a piece of wood. "Here in Yamashiro-an, things are different. People live slowly. They listen to nature. We don't try to control everything, we accept what is." I sat beside him, absorbing every word. "But it's not always easy," he continued. "There were moments of doubt, times I wanted to go back to the city where everything was fast and clear. But with time, I learned to see beauty in simple things, in conversation, in working with my hands, in silence." He smiled, looking into the distance. "I believe everyone has to find that place where their soul is at peace. Sometimes, it's not where you expected it to be." After our talk by the bridge, Yuto invited me to walk through the village and its surroundings. His steps were confident and light, as if he knew every stone and path by heart. We followed narrow trails lined with old maples. Their leaves rustled in the breeze, which carried scents of pine and blooming flowers. Yuto shared stories about the village's history, how it endured hard times, how the people supported each other through it all. "Everyone knows everyone here," he said. "But at the same time, everyone has their space, their freedom. This place taught me how to be open, yet stay grounded within." I watched his face and noticed how he found joy even in the simplest things. Gradually, our silence felt natural, no need to explain everything with words. We reached a small hill with a view of the valley below, bathed in the soft light of the setting sun. "This," Yuto said, "this is where I feel truly free." When you look at the world from above, you realize that most problems are just moments. I breathed deeply, letting the beauty fill me. We sat on the stones, watching the sun slowly dip below the horizon. Its warm light played across our faces, bringing a sense of quiet peace. "You know," I began, "sometimes I think we live in a trance. Always running, just because we're used to it, but not knowing why." Yuto nodded, still looking into the distance. "Exactly. And when you find yourself in a place where time moves differently, you begin to understand, real life isn't constant motion. It's the moments you remember." I thought about that. All my anxieties and noise seemed to fade. Have you ever been afraid of being alone with your thoughts? I asked. Yuto gave a small, wistful smile. For most of my life, yes. But now I understand, it's the most important thing, to meet yourself. Without distractions. Without running. We stayed quiet, enjoying the silence and the last rays of sunlight. So what comes next? I asked softly. What comes next, Yuto said, is just to be. And to accept whatever comes. You see, real freedom isn't a place, it's a state of the soul. I felt that his words held the key to something I had long been searching for. Back at the ryokan, I sat on the veranda where the evening breeze swayed the bamboo shades. The sky above the mountains had turned deep blue, dotted with stars that seemed to tell ancient stories. I felt the tension I'd carried for years slowly begin to melt. In this silence that had become my new home, every breath felt meaningful. Memories of the city, the rush, the noise, the endless thoughts, faded like a distant dream. To be here and now, I thought, is not just a phrase, it's an art you must learn. The wind carried the scent of pine forests and the cool freshness of a nearby river. I could feel myself changing, not all at once, but gradually, step by step. And this change wasn't an escape from problems, but a new way of seeing the world. I looked at the notebook where I'd been writing each day, each insight. This, I thought, smiling into the darkness, this is the beginning of my true journey. The next morning, Kyoko called me to help prepare dishes for the temple festival, a village celebration that happens only twice a year. At first, I didn't realize what this event meant to the locals, not just a ceremony, but an act of community, tradition, and gratitude. The kitchen was filled with focused silence. Aki chopped vegetables with the precision of a master. Kyoko ground spices in a stone mortar, closing her eyes and inhaling the aroma of each blend. Every dish here has a soul, she said. We're not just cooking. We're passing down memories. And if you do it with a pure heart, the taste will be true. I had never thought of food as a spiritual practice. When the dishes were ready, we went outside, where people from nearby houses were already gathering. Old and young, children, all dressed simply but festively, wearing smiles that didn't feel forced. Yuto handed me a bowl of rice and said, "For the first time in many years, you are part of this. Not a guest, not an outsider. Part of the living fabric of this place." I never imagined that a simple meal in a mountain village could make me feel something so deep. It wasn't just a shared meal. It was a moment where past, present, and future intertwined in something beyond words. I looked around at the people. At Aki, quietly laughing with the local children. At Kyoko, watching carefully like the guardian of a fire. At Yuto, calm, grounded, strong. And for the first time since my journey began, I thought, maybe I too can stay here. At least, a part of myself. Night fell gently, like nature's breath after a long day. My room's window was open. The sounds of the forest played like soft music, somewhere between the rustle of time and the earth's own breathing. I lay awake, but sleep didn't come. Not from anxiety, quite the opposite. It felt like something important was happening, and I didn't want to miss it. I got up, threw on a light robe, and stepped onto the porch. The air was cool, the sky deep and black, with stars seeming closer than anywhere else. And then I noticed her, Aki. She sat by a paper lantern light, holding an old photo album. Her face was bathed in warm light, but her eyes were far away. "Can't sleep?" she asked without looking up. "No. It's like something's calling me to stay a little longer in this silence." Aki closed her eyes. "There's silence that cuts. And silence that heals. This is the second kind." I sat beside her. "Are those your memories?" I nodded toward the album. "Yes," she smiled faintly. "My father was a traveler. He spent his life roaming Asia, collecting stories. He taught me to see the world deeper than it seems." She showed me pictures. Ancient temples in Cambodia. A market in Kathmandu. The eyes of children in a Tibetan village. All photos taken without any intention to impress, just life as it is. He once told me, travel is not running away from home. It's the way home, if you pay close enough attention. We sat in silence. The wind stirred the pages. I felt her pain and the beauty of her memories were part of why she stayed here. "Don't you plan to go back to the city?" I asked. "Maybe. But no longer to get lost. To be. With meaning. Like water finding its course." Morning was born slowly, like light waking inside the earth before touching the sky. I woke not tired, but renewed, like after a prayer answered without words. Aki waited for me by the gate, wearing a simple gray kimono, with a backpack on her shoulder. "Let's go," she said. "There's a place I don't show everyone." We walked along an old path winding uphill through cedars and pines. Every step was like an exhale. No hurry. The silence here was thick, like a woolen blanket. The trees seemed older than memory itself. "This temple has long been abandoned. The priest died 20 years ago. No one replaced him. But the place still lives," Aki whispered, as if not to wake the mountains. Along the way, she shared. "My father once brought me here. He said, 'This place answers if you listen long enough.' I was a child then, didn't understand. But when he died, I came back, and heard it for the first time." "What did you hear?" I asked. "Myself." We stepped onto a moss-covered stone stairway. Above, a weathered wooden torii gate, cracked but proud. Behind it, the temple itself. Modest, with old tiles, doors creaking in the wind like ancient windows of memory. Inside, no one. Only a wooden statue of Canaan, the goddess of mercy. Her face worn away by time, but something in her posture was gentle, like a mother's gaze. We sat on old tatami mats. Aki closed her eyes. I did the same. And the silence came not from outside, it grew within. "In this place," Aki whispered, "everything unnecessary quietly disappears." I felt something inside me fade too. Fear. Anger. Expectation. All of it seemed weightless here. We stayed in the temple until noon. Not meditating, not speaking, just being. As we walked back down, the world seemed a little different. But maybe I was the one who had changed. It felt as if time in the village flowed differently. Not forward, but inward. Day by day, I learned to live in the rhythm of Yamashiro-an, helping Aki in the kitchen, carrying firewood with Yuto, sometimes just sitting on a bench by the shop, listening to the elders speak, slowly, with meaningful pauses. Kyoko entrusted me with cooking rice over an open fire for the temple dinner, for the first time, on my own. I was nervous, even though the task seemed simple. But it wasn't about the rice. It was about becoming part of the waiting. People were counting on me. While I worked by the cauldron, an elder came up, an old man named Nakajima-san. He looked at me sharply, as if checking whether I really belonged here. In the city, they don't know how to tend a fire, he grumbled. I'm learning, I answered calmly. Most just run away to places like this, he continued without looking at me. But this ground doesn't accept those who don't put down roots. He walked away, leaving behind the smell of tobacco and a salty aftertaste of doubt. I stood silent. It was not an insult, but a test. And I felt I didn't want to be just a guest again. I wanted to be someone who endures and stays. That evening, when the rice was finally ready, people ate silently, thoughtfully. Suddenly Nakajima approached me without a word and placed his empty bowl in front of me, as a sign. Then he simply nodded and left. Yuto smiled. That was his way of saying, "Well done." I felt a strange warmth, not from praise, but from acceptance. Later that night, Aki brought me a paper lantern. On it, calligraphy read, "To root." "That's what I see in you," she said. "Your roots are still thin, but they are searching for the earth. And it seems ready to accept you." Yuto and I set out before dawn. The air was damp, thick with fog. The forest around was silent, but not dead, it was breathing. "We're going to the water hut," Yuto said. "Where the spring never runs dry. They say if you drink from it in silence, it shows you the answer you feared to hear." We walked nearly 3 hours, along a narrow path winding between rocks and roots. Yuto walked confidently, as if he didn't just know the way, he felt it. "Do you go there often?" I asked. "Only when I forget who I am." I was struck by his simplicity. His words held no grandeur, but something deep and true. The hut was very small, made of dark wood, with a moss-covered roof. Beside it was a stone basin, where water trickled thinly from the root of an old cedar. That was the spring. An old man named Mitsuda once lived here. People came to him not for advice, but for silence. He could be so quiet that you found your own answer. Did you come to him? Yuto sat on a stone by the water. His gaze was distant. "I came here after my daughter died. She was little, very bright. Then, illness, fast and merciless. I couldn't breathe in the city. Every sound cut through me, every step felt against life. I was silent, not out of pity, but deep respect. I lived here in this hut for a year. Drank the water every day and waited until I could go back to people again." "And could you?" She didn't return. But I heard her voice here, in the water, in the silence. And since then I know, sometimes pain doesn't pass. It transforms into something else. Into depth. He handed me a bamboo cup. "Drink." In silence. I leaned to the spring. The water was icy cold. When it touched my tongue, everything around seemed to stop. And then, as if from inside, I heard. You're no longer seeking escape. You're seeking truth. And that's something completely different. We stayed until sunset. Yuto made a fire, and we silently brewed tea. And in the evening, just as the day seemed to end, she appeared. A woman in a white kimono, her hair tied in a knot. Her figure seemed to dissolve in the mist, real, yet elusive. "That's Sayo," Yuto whispered. "She comes only when someone is truly ready to hear." She looked at me, directly, deeply, as if seeing what I couldn't name myself. "You carry pain that is not yours," she said softly. "And it's time to let it go." We returned to the village in silence. Yuto didn't ask what I felt at the spring. He knew some experiences can't be shared with words. And just beyond the first ridge, when Yamashiro-an reappeared before us, the rain began. At first, light as a breath. Then, determined. Rain in the mountains always comes suddenly, but this one seemed planned. As if something in the earth and sky agreed on this change. When we stepped onto the narrow street, the village was already different. Children no longer ran. Dogs were silent. The air was filled with the smell of dampness, old wood, and tea. People closed their windows, not out of fear, but out of memory. Kyoko waited at the temple's doorstep. Her hair was slightly wet, and her eyes were watchful but anxious. "Did something happen?" Yuto asked. "Aki hasn't returned from the forest." My heart clenched. "She left yesterday, to the hill where the white moss grows. She said she wanted to be alone. But usually she doesn't stay that long. And now, it's raining." Yuto nodded. "Let's go look." "Are you coming with me?" I only nodded. No words. The forest in the rain is another creature. Soft, wild, unpredictable. It's not hostile, but demands respect. Trails that were clear yesterday were now gone beneath layers of fallen leaves, wet branches, and water flowing just over the earth. "She sometimes disappears," Yuto said. "But she always comes back." "Why the white moss?" I asked. "That's where she last saw her father. They used to go there every spring." And then, he trailed off. We found her near evening. She sat beneath a rock where a pine with a curved trunk loomed overhead. Her body was whole but tired. She held an old cloth bandage in her hand, with an embroidered sign resembling the infinity symbol. When she saw us, she only whispered, "I'm not lost. I just stayed." We didn't ask more. We just sat beside her, under the rain. That night, the village did not sleep. The rain tapped on roofs like an invisible guest, reminding people of what they had forgotten. There was calm and unrest in the air at once. And I dreamed of the forest, not dark, not scary, but alive. Full of voices that didn't sound, but spoke. We stayed at the temple for a few days. The rain, which wouldn't stop, flooded the paths and made everyone stay indoors, listening to sounds that even echoed differently in the mist. The streets were empty. The village, once so alive under the beautiful sunlight, now felt like a sealed-off world moving in slow motion. But even in this rhythm, there is harmony, an inner order. We spent a lot of time at the temple, helping to prepare food, tend the fire. But mostly, we stayed silent. Aki sat on the floor, running her fingers across the fabric of an old map she had brought from the forest. It was a map not only of Yamashiro-an but also of the surrounding forests and mountains, as if all the pieces of the world were slowly coming together in her hands, like she had been part of this place from the very beginning. You know, I'm not just living here. I watch everyone who comes, she said once. Not right away, but in time you can tell who's really trying to be here. I was surprised. How can you tell? She smiled, but it was a smile touched by sadness. It's like water that seems shallow at first. And you think everything's fine. But after a while, you start to feel the ground disappear under your feet. That's when the answer comes. That evening, we both sat in the temple. I could feel the rain gently tapping against the walls, and inside, the silence kept growing, starting to fill the soul. The next morning, when the rain finally began to ease, I went to the village. I wanted to talk to Nakajima, to understand why he kept questioning me. Not to justify myself, but to understand why this man was so cautious. His house was at the edge of the village, where the wind usually stops. He didn't often receive visitors, and I knew that. But this time was different. "You're here again," he said as I stepped through the door. "I came to talk, Nakajima-san," I replied. He didn't object, just nodded and pointed to a chair. "You don't want to leave this place, do you?" he asked. I sat down silently. "No, I don't." The answer was simple, like those forest paths. He looked at me for a long time, then picked up a bowl of tea. "People like you come and go," he said. "Sometimes they leave a part of themselves here, and sometimes, everything. You don't know what that means." I smiled. "But I'm trying to understand." "And maybe that's the most important thing," he replied quietly. That evening, when I returned to the temple, everything felt different. For a moment, everyone paused their daily tasks and looked at me. I walked up to Aki. "I think I'm starting to understand why this world is different. It's not just the people. It's the land." She looked at me, her gaze calm but with a certain depth. "Yes, the land remembers. It remembers everything we do." The rain stopped suddenly. As if someone up above had said, "Enough." Water still shimmered on the grass, but the air already smelled of sunlight. A quiet, balanced joy spread through the village. People returned to their chores, fixing roofs, clearing roads, fetching water from the spring. That day I helped Aki dry the books stored in the temple. The old pages were slightly damp, and we carefully laid them out near the window. She was humming something softly, a song without words, like a lullaby for the light. Suddenly, a figure appeared in the doorway of the temple. A tall man in dark clothes. Slightly tired, with a dusty backpack and deep lines by his eyes. And, a gaze I recognized instantly. It was Leo. My former colleague. A man with whom I once traveled across Asia, worked on documentary projects. We ran through the streets of Kolkata together, slept in old flats in Bucharest, filmed dawns on the banks of the Yangtze. And then, everything changed. Projects fell apart. Some left, some ran away. I disappeared. "Wow," he said, looking at me. I didn't think I'd find you here. Honestly, I was just walking through the mountains. They sent me this way when I asked about lodging. Someone mentioned, there's a foreigner at the temple. I couldn't say anything. I just smiled, but it was a strange smile, more inward than outward. You disappeared. And then I disappeared from the lives of those looking for you, he added. We stepped out into the temple courtyard. I guided him along the paths I already knew by heart. And he looked around in silence. It's quiet here, he said. But this quiet is louder than any metropolis. That's why I'm here. And are you happy? I feel whole. We sat at the edge of the platform, overlooking the hills steaming after the rain. Leo spoke again. Do you remember Tbilisi? When we filmed that story about the old potter? And in the evening you told me something I couldn't forget, the world isn't saved by big projects. It's saved by presence. I didn't understand what you meant back then. And now? He sighed. Maybe I'm starting to. That night, Leo stayed at the temple. Aki gave him a spot by the window, where the wind always plays gently with the curtain. Yuto silently handed him tea. And Nakajima just looked at me and said, You see? Even the shadow of the past finds its way here. The question is, what will you do with it? The morning after Leo's arrival was quiet, but not calm. Like the air before a storm, no lightning, but tension in every movement. Yuto brewed tea slowly. His eyes didn't rise from the cup, and his words fell like pebbles to the bottom of a stream. A guest isn't just a person. It's a test, he finally said. Aki was composed, polite, but cautious. She understood. Leo spoke a language that no longer belonged to Yamashiro-an. The language of pace, of explanations, of goals. The language of, what's next? Which meant nothing here. Do you really live here? Leo asked as we stepped out to the slope behind the temple. Yes. What does that even mean? You just, wake up, make tea, listen to the rain. Have you ever listened to the rain? He sighed. In the city, rain means traffic, delays, gray windows. But here, it does sound different. Still, you know this isn't real life. It's a pause. I looked at him for a long time. What if the pause is real life? He was silent. Then he smiled, but in that smile, there was confusion. In the afternoon, Leo went with Yuto to the lower part of the forest. He wanted to see the place where you all are hiding. And Yuto silently agreed, not out of curiosity, but from a quiet need to understand who we had let into our world. I stayed with Aki. We were drying rice in the yard, hanging herbs. And for the first time, I asked, Does it bother you that he's here? She looked up. There was no judgment in her eyes. Only truth. It doesn't bother me. I just see how you change around him. Change? Your shoulders tighten, your voice speeds up, your eyes grow restless. You go back to where you ran from, even if you haven't stepped past the gate. I had no words. Aki continued. I'm not against people from outside. But I need to know who you want to be here. And with whom? In the evening, Leo returned with Yuto, exhausted, but moved. This place is like a dream. But I think it doesn't like being woken up. Yuto said nothing. He just sat by the fire, as always. He knew how to be present, even in silence, especially in silence. I was thinking, maybe I'll stay a few more days. Leo asked carefully. Yuto didn't say yes or no. He only said, silence doesn't like haste. But it won't tolerate restlessness either. If you stay, stay for real. That night, I couldn't sleep. The window whispered with gentle water, branches tapping on the roof like someone up there was remembering something. And I remembered too. Words, frames, planes, waiting rooms. Leo. Myself. And then, I recalled one simple feeling, the first time I woke up here and wasn't afraid of the silence. The morning was clear. Dawn spilled soft gold through the temple windows, and even the spiders in the corners seemed frozen in peace. After the rain, the village breathed freely, every leaf, every wooden beam crackled with new light. Aki had gone out before we woke. She often did, gathering herbs on the hills, where the moss was soft and the sun touched the earth first. When Leo noticed her absence, he quickly asked, "Is she always this withdrawn?" I shrugged. She's part of this place. And its rhythm, it doesn't always match ours. But can't we reach her somehow? I just want to talk. Understand. Are you sure understand is the right word? He didn't answer. After breakfast, Leo went looking for Aki. No warning, no invitation. He just left, like a tourist stumbling into someone else's prayer. I stood by the eastern maple when I saw his figure disappear among the pines. Yuto sighed softly beside me. When someone from the city hears silence, they either flee or try to explain it. But silence doesn't need explaining. You think he'll make a mistake? I think he already did. When Leo returned, his face was tense. He passed me, but I still asked. What happened? I found her near the slope, she was gathering something. I walked up, tried to talk. I said she seemed distant. That maybe she lives here because she's hiding. I closed my eyes. And what did she say? She looked at me, very calmly. And said, "You call this running away? I call it a path." Then she left. Not angry. But I knew it hurt her. Even if she didn't show it. That evening, we all sat by the temple. Aki was quiet, but not cold. Her presence, like water in a jug, still but undeniable. Leo tried to speak a few times, but didn't. Yuto lit the fire, and in his hands, the sparks felt calm as breath. Then Aki spoke, without looking at anyone. There are places where questions don't belong. There are hearts that won't open through asking. They open through shared silence. No one answered. It was a truth meant not to be commented on, just left in the air. That night, I lay by the open window for a long time. The wind brought the scent of pine, old stones, and spring, not yet here, but already pulsing in every vein. And I thought, maybe the path isn't always forward. Maybe it's the ability to stay. The morning didn't begin with the sound of bells, as usual. Not with the flutter of a swallow's wing above the roof, not with Yuto's quiet voice preparing tea. It began with silence, the kind that needs no words. It arrived as gently as the moment you stop fearing solitude. Leo lay on his tatami mat on the wooden floor. The roof creaked in rhythm with the morning wind. The air smelled of clay after the night rain, of grass, and something slightly smoky, perhaps the fire that hadn't yet gone cold. He didn't rush to get up. He just listened. To himself. To the world. What it's like when nothing calls you. Nothing pushes or demands. Instead of anxiety, lightness. Instead of plans, simply being. Why does it feel like I woke up for the first time? Leo thought. When he stepped outside, he saw no one. The temple slept. The trees stood as if awaiting a new chapter. Everything around him was a still canvas, until he heard a familiar voice. "Hey," I said, sitting under a cherry tree just beginning to bloom. Couldn't sleep. Slept better than ever. But I feel like I can't be who I was anymore. It's strange. That's called awakening. Leo sat down quietly. He looked at his hands like they were unfamiliar. For the first time in years, I'm not thinking about work. Deadlines. Schedules. I'm just feeling the air breathe. What do you think you were looking for when you came here? An answer. And I found silence. Sometimes they're the same thing. In the afternoon, Yuto and I were fixing an old wooden bench by the temple. It had stood there for probably more than 100 years, weathering time, rain, winters, children, memories, smiles, losses. Yuto, as always, didn't hurry. His movements were part of a ritual, as if he wasn't just repairing wood, but restoring a connection between time and space. "Leo," he said, "you don't need to become someone new. Being yourself is already enough. Just learn to stay." Leo held his breath. I've been running my whole life. Even when I was at the height of success, something inside was always burning. Like I was losing something important, but I didn't know what. And now? For the first time, I want to stay. Not for someone else. Not because it's beautiful here. But because I am here. Not the person people know. But the one I've never seen before. That evening, Aki invited us to her place. It was the first time, before, she would simply appear, like wind, like a leaf in a stream. We sat by her little house, which smelled of firewood and dried mint. She brought hot tea with rice milk, and each sip was warmer than the last. "I heard you've decided to stay," she said to Leo. "Yes. At least for a while. I don't know what comes next, but for the first time, I'm not afraid of not knowing." She nodded. Her eyes reflected the fire's glow. "This place isn't for running away. It's for transformation." Leo smiled. "And what was your transformation?" Aki paused. For a long time. As if she was gathering herself piece by piece from the past. "I lost my brother. He disappeared in the mountains many years ago. We were children. I left the city because I couldn't breathe there anymore. At first, coming here was an escape. But then I realized I wasn't running. I was returning to myself. Her voice didn't tremble. But we felt everything, the depth, the pain, and at the same time, the healing. Before bed, Leo approached me. "This was the most important day of my life," he said. "And it was so simple that I barely noticed when I became happy." "And that's the secret," I replied. The pre-dawn silence of Yamashiro-an felt like what lingers after a dream, when you haven't forgotten it yet, but can already hear your heart. Everything stood at the threshold, between night and light, between the past and something new, still unnamed. The water in the pond was still, like a mirror reflecting nothing but essence. The trees were asleep, but their silence trembled, ready to whisper, "A new day has come." Leo stood barefoot in the wet grass, wearing a light kimono Yuto had given him. He wasn't seeking beauty, he stood there because, for the first time, he felt part of something greater than his thoughts. And so, he didn't move. I approached quietly, not breaking the silence. With every step, I felt the earth breathing beneath my feet. "For the first time, I'm not afraid of morning," Leo said, without turning. "Because you're not trying to hide from yourself?" He sighed. "Yes. And because I realized, everything I was looking for wasn't a new life. It was the chance to feel my own." We sat by the pond, our feet in the dew. The sun was just beginning to touch the horizon, and its first rays barely brushed the water. It was a moment that couldn't be postponed or repeated. It simply was, and it passed. But in it was more truth than in any book. "Do you want to stay?" I asked. "I want to learn how to live. Not just to stop working. Not to run away. But to learn to see what once seemed empty. I want to be of service. Not as a professional. As a human being." He looked at me, calmly, with childlike honesty. "I've seen how you live. And I've seen Aki. And Yuto. There's no rush in you, but every movement has meaning. I want that too. It's harder than it seems. Silence is like water. At first, it refreshes you. Then it tightens. And then, either you learn to swim, or you drown in yourself. I'm ready." That night, Aki invited Leo and me to her home again. It was one of those nights when even lanterns dim themselves not to outshine the stars. Her house was filled with the scent of dried mushrooms, cinnamon, and tea. Everything was lit by candles, and the shadows of the flames danced on the walls like old spirits guarding the peace. "Tonight, I want to give you something," she said, pulling out an old wooden box. "Something my brother left me." Leo tensed. He had heard her story. She rarely touched the past in detail. "It's his journal. I've read it hundreds of times, but I never felt ready to share it. Until now." She handed it to Leo. And that gesture meant more than any words. In it, he didn't just write about the mountains. He wrote about observation. About how the world speaks to us, if we stop shouting. Leo opened the book to a random page. It said, "Silence is not the absence of sound. It's the space in which you can hear the voice of a tree, the step of the wind, and finally, yourself." After reading, he stayed silent for a long time. Then he said, "Aki, this isn't just a journal. It's a compass. And I don't know why, but I feel like I should write too. Not about success. Not about achievements. But about what reveals itself when you stop hiding. She smiled. That's exactly why I gave it to you. The next day, Leo gathered everyone in the garden. He held a new notebook in his hands, still blank. I want to stay here for a season. Learn to live in silence. And write every day, about the day, about myself, about what opens up. If you'll allow it, I want to be part of this place. And give myself to it. Yuto placed his teacup on the table and nodded. In Yamashiro-an, there are no guests or residents. There are those who listen. And those who have not yet learned. All right, said Leo. Then I'll listen. That day, he didn't become someone new. He simply shed a layer. And beneath it, he found himself. The one who doesn't run. Doesn't prove. Doesn't need to. He simply is. And that was enough for a new story to begin. Rekindled by time. On the floor, traces of mice. And yet, everything felt alive. He lit a fire in the stove, brewed tea. When he first heard the kettle boil in that silence, he realized he had never truly drunk tea before. On the first day, he simply sat. He didn't write, didn't read, didn't analyze. Just observed. How light fell across the wooden floor. How steam from the tea rose upward like a prayer. On the second day, he began to write. Not sentences, but phrases. Fragments. I am not a role. I am not a result. I am presence. Why was I afraid to be alone? Maybe because this is where my truth waits. On the third day, he spoke aloud to himself. And for the first time, he felt no shame. Because a voice in an empty room is the echo of the soul. On the fourth night, a storm came. The roof rang. Rain pounded the windows. And then, silence. And in that silence, Leo saw himself. In the reflection of the window, not just his face, but the image of the boy who once wanted to be an artist. Who dreamed of painting on metro walls, on old doors, on the sky. You abandoned me, the boy said. I had no choice, Leo replied. You always had a choice. You just didn't trust me with your life. They fell silent. Can I still get you back? I never left. On the fifth day, an old man came to the cabin. He had a long beard and carried a basket of mushrooms on his back. I come here once a month to gather healing herbs. Saw the light. May I? Of course. Come in. They drank tea. The old man was silent. And only when Leo asked his name, he replied. I am the one you meet when you're ready not to move forward. Leo didn't understand. Sometimes the path isn't forward. It's deeper. Are you a sage? No. I just fear silence less than noise. He left just as he came, leaving behind the scent of clay and pine. But Leo was left with the feeling that this man wasn't quite human. Or perhaps, a human who had stopped being just a body. Leo spent the final morning in complete silence. He didn't light a fire. Didn't write. just sat on the doorstep and watched the day begin. And with each ray of light, it became clearer: you don't have to change to be real. You just have to allow yourself to be. When he returned to Yamashiro-an, Aki was waiting for him at the gate. She only looked at him, and said nothing more. But he understood everything. Journal entry. The way home isn't always marked on a map. Sometimes it's a path you draw with your foot right on the ground, as you walk, as you stay silent, as you become yourself again. The first time Leo woke up to light instead of anxiety was in early April. The sun touched his eyelids gently, and from the window came the faint scent of bark and fresh buds. Sakura had begun to bloom at Yamashiro-an. The blossoming wasn't loud, it was precise. The silence was filled with the whisper of petals. Each day, the trees bloomed more abundantly, and each time it felt like a miracle meant just for him. By the edge of the pond where he walked each morning, there stood a cherry tree with a split trunk. Its name was Kyo. According to legend, it only bloomed when the heart of the one looking at it was open. When Leo first saw it in full bloom, he couldn't say a word. I used to think spring was just a season. But it turns out, it's a state. And if you're open, it enters you, like light into a curtainless room. At the temple, preparations for Hanami, the annual cherry blossom celebration, had begun. Not as a tourist show, but as a ritual. Each resident was to contribute something personal, cook a dish, write a poem, or create a small gift for the tree. Leo decided to write an illustrated letter to Kyo, the sakura tree. He painted its branches with ink. But instead of realism, he searched for movement, as if the tree were dancing. He tried to convey what he felt, not the image of the sakura, but its inner rhythm. Its breath. On the back, he wrote, "Thank you for blooming for me. I thought trees couldn't speak. But you said more than anyone ever has." The celebration began at twilight. People in white kimonos sat on mats, tea steamed from bamboo cups, lanterns swayed in rhythm with the wind. And the petals. They drifted like soft snow, but warm, like a touch. Leo was pouring tea when he saw him. A familiar silhouette stood on the path, upright posture, gray coat, glasses. The face was changed by the years, but in the eyes, the same irony. Thomas? Leo couldn't believe it. "Hello, wanderer. You're hard to find, but easier than it seems, if you read between the lines. How did you find me?" "One of your letters. To your mother. It was more honest than you ever allowed yourself to be with me." Leo stayed silent. "I'm not here to blame you. I'm here, because I got lost too. And I thought, if you found your way, maybe I'll understand something just by being near you." They sat beneath Kyo, drinking tea. Silent. "I thought you were angry," Leo said. "I was. But only until I realized, you weren't running from me. You were running from yourself. I was just the extra mirror. Here, I've learned to stop running. I can see that. And at the same time, you're different. Softer. Deeper. And you?" Thomas sighed. "I'm still in that world. But I'm tired of pretending I'm alive. I want to learn how you got here, and whether I can too." Thomas stayed for a few days. In the evenings, he, Leo, Aki, and Yuto sat by the pond, listening to the murmur of water, and most surprisingly, laughing. "You know," said Thomas, "you never painted what was outside. You always painted what was inside. You just used to be afraid to call it real. I'm not afraid anymore. And that is the most beautiful thing I've ever seen." On the 6th day, Thomas left. But before he did, he left a note. "I'm not leaving this place. I'm carrying it within me. Maybe we'll meet again. But even if not, thank you for becoming yourself again. It's more inspiring than any masterclass." On the final night, the petals began to fall. Leo sat by Kyo, wrapped in a blanket, watching it all pass. And he didn't feel sad. Because spring isn't only about blooming. It's also about letting go. And in every fallen petal, there's a promise of a new beginning. Journal entry. I used to run from my old self. Now, I take him by the hand and dance with him, among the petals, in the eternal motion of change. In the days when the sakura petals fall, the air in Yamashiro-an changes. There's less celebration and more silence. It's like after a deep conversation, when the words have already been spoken, but their weight still pulses through the space. Leo would wake early, when the sky was still silver, sit by the window with a cup of warm tea, and watch the petals slowly spiral in the air before touching the ground. The temple had grown quiet. Aki had gone to a neighboring monastery for a few days. Yuto was working on repairs in the old storage house. Leo was left almost alone. And it was that very silence that drew out something in him he had long been afraid to touch, the need to speak. Not out loud. Not to someone near. But to those who lived in his memory, in his pain, in his shadows. To those he had failed to understand before. He took a sheet of coarse paper, poured the ink, and began to write. Without a plan. Without hope for an answer. Just with honesty. The first letter, to his father. Leo had held this inside for so long. And even now, as the words poured onto the paper, his hands trembled. "Hi. I don't know why it's still hard for me to call you Dad. Maybe because we never learned how to be there for each other. You were silent. I was sensitive. And every pause of yours felt like a judgment. But maybe, you just didn't know how to speak. Maybe no one taught you either. Maybe your silence was fear, not indifference. I often remember you sitting in the kitchen at 5 a.m., before any of us woke up, just staring out the window. I used to think you were escaping. Now I think, you were just breathing. Like I am now. If you're somewhere out there, know this, I'm not angry. I'm no longer afraid of becoming like you. And maybe that means I've forgiven you." Leo folded the paper in half, placed it on the stone by the window. Not to send, but to release. Then he wrote another, this time to himself, at 17. To the one who feared everything and everyone, but still dreamed so loudly that the echo carried through the years. I know how much it hurts. You think you'll never become someone. That your fear is weakness. But I'm here, years later, telling you, it's not weakness. It's depth. You don't yet know that your hands will touch the world not to defend, but to create. That your gentleness will become strength. You don't know yet what will break you. But you also don't know, you'll grow through those cracks. And become a tree. Thin, maybe. But strong. I love you. Even if you haven't learned to love yourself yet. He set the paper aside again. But this time, with a smile. Like after a deep breath. Later that evening, he wrote the third letter. The hardest. Not because of pain, but because of the unspoken. A letter to the girl he had left, without ever saying why. And whom he still carried in his heart, not as love, but as a memory of who he might have been. I never explained anything. I just disappeared. And that's the cruelest thing I ever did to you. I was afraid that if I said, I don't know who I am, you'd leave. And I couldn't bear one more loss. So I left first. I don't expect forgiveness. But I want you to know, I remember you as light. You were kind at a time when I didn't believe kindness existed. I've painted you more than once, even while living among other mountains, other people. There was a calm in your eyes that I needed like air. And I left because I was afraid to breathe. I've learned how now. But you're already in another world. And I hope it's kind to you. He didn't hide the letters, he placed them on a stone in the garden, covering them with small pebbles. As if he had left a part of himself in that space, now purified, ready to exist without the burden. He didn't need an answer. He simply let the truth exist. That night, he dreamt a strange dream. He was walking along a path, and beside him walked three people, silent, but gentle. One, with his father's eyes. Another, with the hands of the boy who once feared light. And the girl, touching a tree with petal-like fingers. They said nothing in the dream. But Leo wept. Not from pain, from the fact that he could finally stop holding it all inside. When he awoke, the sky was already brightening. And in it, in the clear morning air, there were no shadows. Only light. Real. Like a room with no curtains. In Yamashiro-an, the rain didn't simply fall. It arrived like a guest, unhurried, with the first touches of moisture in the air, with the heaviness of clouds that hung low, as if preparing for a conversation. That morning, the clouds gathered so close above the temple that it seemed they brushed the treetops. The first drops fell one by one, like tentative words. Then more followed, denser, steadier, more even. It was the very spring rain Leo had been waiting for, the kind that cleanses not only the air, but the heart. The pond where Kyo had once bloomed was shrouded in a light mist. Petals still clinging to the branches began to fall with the rain, as if finishing a final dance. Leo stood under the awning by the tea room, watching how the rain transformed the space. In this gray, rhythmic music there was a harmony he hadn't noticed before. And peace. A kind of peace that allows you to breathe fully, even underwater. Yuto approached him silently and handed him a cup of tea. The hot, slightly smoky infusion smelled of wormwood and dried ginger. In the rain, everything grows faster, he said. Not just the earth. Leo smiled. He understood now, this downpour was no coincidence. It was the next stage of cleansing. That same day, Aki returned. Her kimono was speckled with rain, her hair slightly clinging to her forehead. She entered the temple without a word, but something new glowed in her eyes, a deeper calm than before. "How was your journey?" Leo asked. "As always, sometimes hard, sometimes easy. But always worthwhile." They sat together, watching the rain that hadn't stopped. "I have to leave," she said suddenly. "Tomorrow morning. To the village of Nokami. There's an old master there who once taught my teacher. He wants to see me, for the first time in many years." "Are you afraid?" Leo asked. "A little. Because every meeting with the past is like looking into a deep well. You never know who you'll see in the water, yourself, or someone else." "I'll go with you," Leo said, surprising even himself. Aki was silent for a few seconds, then nodded. Her agreement wasn't surprised. As if she had known he would say exactly that. The next morning they set out. The rain still hadn't stopped. They drove in a small car, slowly, along narrow roads between rice fields. The air was thick with moisture and the scent of soil. The landscape blurred outside the window, like an old watercolor. And in that movement there was a kind of meditation, a sense that each turn of the road revealed not just a new view, but a new layer of the self. Nokami greeted them with silence. The village consisted of a few dozen wooden houses covered in moss, and a single large oak tree in the square. Everything there seemed frozen in time. Rain tapped on roofs, leaves, puddles, and it felt as if it spoke to each house individually. The old master, named Son, lived on the edge of the village. His house resembled the earth itself, dark, covered in wood and mildew, but alive with breath. Son came out to greet them himself. He was over 80, but his posture was straight, like someone who had never betrayed himself. His eyes, bright as a child's. He bowed silently to Aki, then to Leo. And invited them inside. Inside, it smelled of wood, dried herbs, and ink. The walls were covered in calligraphy, hundreds of sheets, each bearing a single word. Life. Darkness. Joy. Silence. Peace. Rain. "You came at the best time," Son said. "When it's better to listen than to speak." He poured them tea and served it on wooden trays. Then sat across from them. "I've watched the world for a long time. And I've learned to tell the difference between those who come for knowledge, and those who come for change. You are the latter." He looked at Leo. "You have the eyes of someone who's stopped hiding. But your heart still beats unevenly. There's a conversation you haven't finished. And it's not with a person." Leo didn't respond, but his heart resonated, like a tuning fork. Son led them to the back of the house. There was an open terrace from which the entire moss-covered hill could be seen, dotted with ferns. Water dripped from a bamboo pipe into a stone bowl, steadily, without haste. "Tomorrow, you'll sit here. Alone. And you'll speak with the rain," the old man said. "Not about yourself. But for yourself. It will hear you. Because it's already here." That night, Leo didn't sleep soundly. Not from anxiety, but from anticipation. It felt as if every drop falling from the roof carried a question he hadn't yet dared to ask. And an answer he'd long feared to hear. The next morning, he stepped onto the terrace, just as instructed. He sat down. And for a long time, he was silent. Then he began to speak. Not with words, but with his soul. The silence was not complete, it was pierced by every drop of rain falling from the bamboo pipe into the stone basin. This rhythm did not disrupt but rather structured his presence. It allowed Leo not to get lost in his thoughts, but to float through them like a boat, without struggling against the current. For the first time in a long while, he was not searching for meaning in words, not constructing answers. He was simply sitting. And breathing along with the rain. In front of him was a hill covered with ferns and lichens, as if the earth itself had grown tired of brightness and dressed itself in calm. The rain penetrated every inch of this scene. It did not stop, and in that lay its truth, tireless, quiet, constant. Leo sat on the terrace almost motionless. His shoulders were slightly hunched, hands resting on his knees, eyes half closed. Not meditating, not in any form, just being. "I'm afraid," he whispered to himself, not feeling that he was speaking out loud. And something inside him responded. For the first time, this admission did not sound like weakness. It was not a scream, but felt like a truthful breath after a long hold. And the rain heard it. It answered, louder, softer, steadier. "I'm afraid," Leo repeated. "Not of what will happen, but of what already is. Because inside me, there is still so much pain I have not acknowledged. So much anger I have turned into exhaustion. So much love I have not allowed myself to feel." He did not need a witness. He did not need a listener. He was not speaking to anyone. He was speaking into a space that for the first time demanded nothing in return. A space where the rain did not judge, but accepted. "I have learned to be silent. Learned to smile when I want to scream. Learned to disappear into the crowd even when I was seeking closeness. And I am tired of being someone. I want to be no one. Simply, to be. Without plans, without goals, without a biography." His fingers trembled. He understood, these words, now spoken, had waited for years. They could not be said in the city, among friends, not even to loved ones. They demanded absolute presence and no fear of being misunderstood. They could only be spoken before the rain. "I don't know what I want. And that is my deepest healing. Because I no longer have to answer questions I made up for myself. I no longer have to be strong. I can break, and be whole in that." He closed his eyes. The rain did not stop. And then, like a shadow in his imagination, a figure appeared. Like a child's version of Leo himself, about 5 years old, with messy hair, in an old t-shirt, barefoot, a little scared but curious. "Do you remember me?" the child asked. "I didn't want to, for a long time," Leo whispered. "Why?" "Because you didn't know how to protect yourself. And I was taught to be strong. But you are weak. You cry. And you do too." Little Leo sat beside him in the imagination, hugging his knees. And Leo allowed himself to do what he had never done before. He reached out his hand, and embraced that boy. Himself. Without shame. Without irony. Without understanding. Simply, with love. Tears began to flow down Leo's cheeks, not from pity, not from regret, but from truth. And the rain, as if listening, began to fall softer. As if crying with him. A long time passed. Leo did not know, an hour, 2, a whole day. But when he opened his eyes, the air was different. The rain began to recede. Instead of a roar, a thin ringing of leaves. Instead of a waterfall, a quiet music of drops dripping from branches. He returned to the house. Aki sat inside, silently, in lotus position, staring into the fire. She didn't ask anything. She only looked at him, and nodded. Like a person who sees that someone has returned from a deep journey, and is no longer the same. They spent that evening in silence. But Leo felt, inside him there was no longer emptiness. There was depth, filled, accepted, real. And even loneliness no longer seemed like a shadow. It became a place. His inner temple. Yamashiro-an greeted Leo and Aki quietly, not only because they had returned from rainy no Kami, but also because the space itself seemed to sense, someone else was still coming here. The garden was different. Not because it had changed itself, but because Leo had changed. Every stone now held meaning. Every uneven patch in the gravel, every yellowed branch fallen into the pond, spoke a language he had learned to listen to in the rain. It was no longer a landscape. It was a living organism breathing with him. Yuto met them at the entrance. His eyes lingered on Leo a little longer than usual. "You're beginning to breathe," he said. Leo smiled. He didn't fully understand, but he didn't deny it either. Yes, maybe this was breathing. The first, the new one. They hadn't yet entered the tea house when a figure appeared behind the pagoda. Unknown. And yet, strikingly familiar. Tall, in a black windbreaker, slightly hunched, with a cane in hand. His face half hidden under a hood. Yuto silently turned and left, like someone who feels, this is not his scene. Leo froze. "How did you find me?" he asked quietly. The stranger lowered his hood. Hair short, black with gray, chin covered in a weak stubble. Eyes gray-green, deep, like someone who many times hadn't found an answer, but always kept asking. "I wasn't looking. Something else brought me here," he replied. Aki stepped aside, leaving them alone. "I thought you were in Iceland," Leo said. "I was. Then Portugal. Then, nowhere. And now, here. And apparently, not by accident. It was Run. A man Leo once knew better than anyone. For a long time, a traveler, philosopher, homeless photographer. They had traveled together before Leo decided to settle down. Spent nights in the mountains of Georgia, drank rice wine in Kyoto, silently watched sea storms in Hokkaido. Then, they parted ways. No quarrels, no drama. Just silence. But that silence turned out to be louder than any words. "You have changed," Ren said. "You have learned to be silent, honestly." Leo nodded. "And you?" "I'm still on the road." They sat on stones near the pond. A seagull passed by, flapping wet wings. Run looked into the water. "I'm afraid too." Not tired, afraid. That I won't be able to start again. Do you have to start? Leo asked. What else is there? Otherwise, it's just a burden. The past that never becomes history. Leo was silent. He knew what these words meant. Every single one. Because he himself had recently thought them, every day. I don't know why I came here, Ren said. But something tells me, here, for the first time, I can stop running. Just sit. Silently. Without a map, without a flight. And without an answer, Leo added. Ren nodded. And then, they simply fell silent. For a long time. And in this silence, there was neither pain nor weight. Only, a meeting. Two people who found each other again. And this time, not through plans, but through fatigue. And through the readiness to stay. Candles crackled in the stone niche of the old pavilion, standing separate from the main tea house. Monks once lived there, but over the years only a few cushions, a wooden table, a bell in the corner, and the scent of cinnamon in the air remained. It was here Leo decided to invite Ren to spend the night, not to talk, but to simply be. The fire between them was low, dim, but enough to cast shadows on the walls. Time was blurred, they did not count hours, only listened. The sake found somewhere in a clay jug warmed their hands and loosened their tongues. I haven't photographed in almost a year, Ren said, looking at the flames. The camera became a burden. Everything I shot was not about others, it was about me. And I realized, I wasn't looking at the world, I was searching for my pain in it. And now? Leo asked. Now I'm learning to see. Without a lens. Without filters. Without myself between the frame and the moment. He took a sip. I was alone in Portugal. A small village on the cliffs. Every day the sun set as if the world was ending. And do you know what I did? He smiled. Nothing. Not a single photo. Just watched. And cried. Leo didn't respond. Something tightened in his chest. He recognized this story as if he had lived it himself. And at the same time, as if it were a cry from another self he hadn't listened to in a long time. I also had a moment when I stopped writing, Leo said. I was afraid that every word was not a reflection of truth, but just an attempt to convince myself that it exists. Now, sometimes I allow myself to be silent even in writing. They sat quietly, like monks without a vow. And who were you with then, in Portugal? Leo asked carefully. Ren spun the cup in his hands. His voice grew a little muffled. With someone I loved. Then with someone I betrayed. And ultimately, with no one. And you know who was the hardest? Myself? Ren nodded. Then, after a long pause, quietly added. I always knew how to be near. But never, fully. I always kept a part of myself away, in reserve. Suddenly, escape. Suddenly, the end. And one day, she noticed. And just left. Without a shout. Without blame. And that was the worst. Because I was left not abandoned, but exposed. Did she have a name? Leo asked. Aya. She told me, you live as if the whole world is a waiting room. But life doesn't arrive, it's already here. A long silence. Ren looked at the fire, then at Leo. And you? Yours? Leo shrugged. There wasn't one. There were many attempts. But each was a runaway. They fled from their pain. And I, hid in theirs. And who didn't find who? Probably all of us, ourselves. They smiled simultaneously. And in that smile, there was no bitterness, only acceptance. The fire died down. Suddenly Ren asked, "Did you ever think I would come back?" Leo was silent longer than necessary to answer. Then quietly said, "Yes. But I wasn't waiting." Ren looked straight into his eyes. "I came back not only because of loneliness, but because I began to believe, if you learn to live, I will too." The words hung in the air like crystal silence. And Leo said, "Then stay. And let's live silently until we understand, what's next." And they sat until dawn. In silence. In truth. In warmth that asked for nothing more than presence. Morning came not abruptly, it seeped through the doors, touching the skin like steam from hot water. The Yamashiro-an gardens breathed the still damp air after the night rain. Drops shimmered on bamboo stalks, motionless, like tiny mirrors. Leo woke not from sounds, but from silence, the kind where someone is already there. Ren sat wrapped in a blanket on the veranda, with an empty cup before him. Drinking tea without tea, a new ritual? Leo smiled, sitting down beside him. Ren shook his head. "I'm just wondering if you need liquid to fill something." Their conversation was interrupted when Aki appeared. She didn't greet them, simply sat down, as always, smoothly, with respect for the moment. In her hands was a tray with 3 cups and a small clay teapot. "This is asamiti," she said, pouring the tea. "The first tea of this year." The leaves were picked at dawn, while the dew was still fresh. She handed them the cups and instead of leaving, stayed. Sat opposite them, legs crossed, watching the steam rise for a long time. "I listened to you last night," she finally said. "Not completely. Just with my heart." The men exchanged glances but remained silent. Aki continued. "You both fear not loneliness, but presence. Because it demands more than escape. It asks to undress completely, not the body, but memory." Leo tightened his grip on the cup. Ren looked straight into her eyes. "Aren't you afraid?" Ren asked quietly. Aki smiled. For the first time, not sadly, but warmly. Almost gently. "I had no choice. I grew up within walls where showing pain was forbidden. But those who are always strong eventually explode silently. My mother was like that. One morning she didn't come out of her room. And I was left with her diary, the only thing where she was alive." A long pause followed. Then she handed Leo a small bundle, old, burnt at the edges. "This is for you. I kept it for a long time. But I felt it should go further." Leo carefully unwrapped the bundle. Inside was a sheet with hieroglyphs drawn in blurred ink. The paper breathed with age and life. Ren leaned closer. "It's a haiku," he whispered. Leo read aloud. In the mountains silence. The kettle whispers to the wind. I am lonely too. Aki's eyes shone. Not with tears, with clarity. My mother wrote this when I was still a child. And I understood it only now. When you arrived. Leo felt something settle within him. As if years of anxiety finally found soft earth to disappear into. May I stay here? Ren asked quietly, looking at Aki. She nodded. But not as a guest. Guests don't come here. Here you either arrive, or lose yourself. Ren smiled. He no longer looked like a traveler. More like someone who had finally found the shore. That morning they said no more. They drank tea, watched the water, and for the first time felt that silence is also a form of prayer. He woke before dawn. His body was still, but his heart seemed to have run a marathon. His eyes opened, and immediately a cold trembled inside. He was dreaming. So clear, so silent, and so familiar. He dreamed of a garden. Not Japanese, not stone or perfectly trimmed. A childhood garden. His grandmother's home, with a low wooden fence, lilacs growing along the path, and a small apple tree in the middle of the clearing. There, in that dream, he stood barefoot, holding a toy compass. So you always find your way home, his grandmother said. But remember, the compass won't show the heart. It is silent, but always knows where to go. In the dream, her face was bright, almost transparent, as if she no longer belonged to this world. She touched his forehead, and he woke up. Leo sat on the bed in the pavilion, legs crossed. The window was open. Fresh air smelled of pine and morning calm. He took a notebook. Wrote immediately, without thinking. Grandmother. I looked for you in tea ceremonies, in the clouds over Kyoto, in the eyes of those who spoke of truth. But maybe truth is that lilac you planted barefoot when the earth was still warm. I missed you. And I'm afraid I learned how to speak correctly but forgot how to truly be silent. He closed the notebook. Then Aki appeared at the door. I brought you breakfast. But I felt, something has changed. Leo nodded. I saw the garden, he said. My real garden. Where I was someone before words. Aki put down the tray and quietly sat down. And what did you see? Myself. Small. And lonely. But not because I was alone. Because no one ever asked me, where does it hurt? Aki looked through him, then replied. In Japanese poetry, there is a symbol, a garden that forgot itself. It is when nature grows as it wishes, without control. It's beautiful, but sad. Because no one left a trace of love there. Leo thought. Slowly. Deeply. I need to go there, he said. To return. Not to run away. But to come. To visit my garden. To visit myself. Aki smiled, but not with words. Only with a look that said, yes, I knew. And Ren? She asked. I think he already feels the journey has changed. And that the next part is not about new lands, but old wounds. Aki stood. Then go. But don't forget, your garden is not only in childhood. It can grow here too. If you water memory, not with regret, but with tenderness. Leo stayed on the veranda for another minute. It seemed to him that the lilac from his dream appeared for a moment beyond the bamboo wall, just as a shadow. But that was enough. That day he decided, it was time to go back. Back, not in space, but in time. Into himself. The evening at Yamashiro-an was special. The air breathed freshness after the rain, and a mist hung over the forest. Paper lanterns were lit in the pavilion, their light flickering as if anxious that something would be heard too deeply. Leo found Ren on the terrace, where he was dismantling his camera. On the table nearby lay undeveloped photos still on film. Ren spun the lens between his fingers like a clockwork mechanism. Have you ever had a dream after which you couldn't breathe in? Leo asked. Ren paused. Slowly, he put the camera down. I have. But I always pretended it was just neural chemistry. And what if it wasn't just that? Ren looked at him. Silence stretched between them, not deafening, but dense, like wool. I saw a garden, Leo said. Mine. From childhood. My grandmother was there. And I was small again. Defenseless. Not sad, real. Ren watched carefully. Without a hint of mockery. Without defense. My garden burned down, he suddenly said. Literally. Leo leaned forward. What? Ren rubbed his neck. His voice was hoarse. We lived in the suburbs. Mother, stepfather, and I. Stepfather was building a greenhouse. Mother planted jasmine and asters. I ran barefoot on the damp earth and thought we were the happiest. And then, one night. One short circuit. And everything burned. The garden, the house, photo albums, toys, childhood. He stopped. Leo did not interrupt. Mother ran out with burned hands, holding me tight. Stepfather, he didn't make it. And I saw him through the fire. That moment became my brand. I couldn't sit still anywhere for long. Because everywhere it seemed something would ignite any second. Now Leo understood. This restlessness, this constant wandering, not a thirst for knowledge. It was fleeing from the fire left inside. So you take photos? Leo asked quietly. Ren nodded. To capture. To hold on to something. To make sure at least something doesn't burn. Leo put his hand on his friend's shoulder. Your garden may be destroyed. But the seed survived. And it's inside you. Do you really believe that? I don't believe. I know. Because I just saw how from my fragments grew a shadow of lilac. So it's possible. It means time is not only for remembering, but for returning. Ren smiled. For the first time, genuinely. Then let's return. With the camera. With memory. But no longer as fugitives. As those ready to sit in the center of the burned garden. And plant something new. Leo nodded. Tomorrow, the first step. Back. To the roots. The night was soft. The silence in the air was the kind found only where people have long learned not to disturb the trees. The freshness of bamboo, the scent of water from the stone basin, the quiet steps in the wooden corridor, they remembered it all with the attentiveness of those who leave for a long time, perhaps forever. Leo packed the last of his things. When he stepped out of the room, Ren was already sitting on the veranda with a cup of still warm tea. A camera lay beside him. In his hands, he turned a small wooden boat, the very one he had carved on the second day after arrival. "Do you think we'll come back here?" Leo asked. Ren nodded, but not immediately. "If the garden grows in us, it will happen for sure." They silently walked down the path leading to the main pavilion. The entrance lantern still glowed with soft yellow light. At the gate, Aki awaited them, in a light kimono scented with lavender and old paper. Her face remained calm, as always, but this time her eyes held some elusive softness. "You both have changed," she said, looking from Leo to Ren. "I don't know how your journey will end, but you have already passed its most important part, the one that leads inward." She handed them a thin package wrapped in furoshiki, a dark blue cloth embroidered by hand with mountains and waves. "Don't open it now. Only when you know you're ready to let go." Ren accepted the package carefully, like a child. He nodded. "We thought we came here just to catch our breath. But it turned out you taught us how to breathe for the first time." Aki smiled. Then, unexpectedly even to herself, she stepped forward and hugged Leo. Lightly, quickly, like a petal touching water. Then Ren. And said, "I'll leave you one more thing." She pulled a small crane made of rice paper from her sleeve. Its wings were thin, almost transparent. On one of them was a hieroglyph, hope. Legends say, if you make 1,000 cranes, a wish will come true. But sometimes one is enough if it's folded from sincerity. She placed the crane in Leo's hand. "Let it be your compass when your heart start to get lost in the mist again." The farewell was without promises. Without phrases like, "see you." Only looks. Only bowed heads. And a silence in which everything important was said. They stepped beyond the gate. The road to the valley stretched down like a silver ribbon. Ahead, a new journey. But this time, not in search of something, but in response to a call born in their silence. Ren was silent for a long time, then opened his palm and looked at the crane. "Do you think we'll find that garden?" Leo didn't answer right away. "We're not searching for it anymore. We're growing it."